Johannesburg, South Africa, September 12, 1961. At 1840 hours, a British file marked Ashen 7-61 lands on a desk that officially does not exist. The man in the photographs looks like a polished German industrialist. Gray suit, country club smile, new face shaped by surgery. But on his inner arm, caught mid-swing beside a golf bag, there's a faint mark the camera can't lie about. An old SS blood type tattoo. For 16 years, MI6 chased a ghost across 4 continents. Now the ghost has an address. And tonight, someone has to decide what justice looks like. Operation Ashen. Heinrich Krause is not famous because he avoided the spotlight by design. Born in 1906 in East Prussia, he learns early that power belongs to the man who controls paperwork, not the man who pulls the trigger. His father runs a regional administrative office, where young Heinrich watches how signatures move mountains and how denials erase problems. By age 27, Krause has joined the party not as a believer, but as a technician. He understands that ideology needs infrastructure. Passion fades. Systems endure. In the 1930s, he moves from party enforcer to organizer, an administrator with a talent for making human beings disappear inside clean-looking forms. Associates describe him as methodical, never theatrical. He doesn't give speeches, he writes memos. He doesn't attend rallies unless protocol demands it. He attends budget meetings. This careful invisibility becomes his signature. While others crave recognition, Krause craves function. He wants to be the mechanism, not the face. By 1943, his skill becomes operationally lethal. Krause helps engineer the Warsaw Ghetto liquidation, turning deportation into a timed system. Rail schedules, quotas, sealed orders, deniable signatures. He creates a bureaucratic machine where every step looks justified on paper. Transport forms cite labor reallocation. Medical exemptions vanish into procedural backlog. Children under certain heights become statistical adjustments in quarterly reports. The genius is that no single document proves murder. Every document proves compliance. Intelligence analysts who later study his work note something chilling. Krause never needed to be present at the violence. His forms did the killing. He is the kind of criminal who leaves fewer fingerprints than memos. When interrogators ask survivors about him, the descriptions stay frustratingly vague. I never saw him. He signed the paper. Someone said he worked upstairs. He weaponizes bureaucracy so thoroughly that murder looks like logistics. When the Reich collapses in May 1945, Krause doesn't run like a soldier. He runs like a planner. He has studied the chaos for months, watching how the system breaks and where the cracks lead. He uses the ratlines, church corridors, sympathetic officials, forged identity papers, and exits Europe as a "you displaced technician." The church route isn't an accident. Krause has cultivated relationships with priests who believe in redemption over prosecution, who see paperwork as their own form of holy work. His greatest trick is making himself look like a victim of war rather than an architect of it. By late 1945, Heinrich Krause no longer exists. The man who replaces him carries better documents. MI6 can't hunt him with normal police methods because normal rules don't fit the post-war world. The doctrine forming inside British intelligence is simple and ugly. Denial beats proof. War crimes tribunals need witnesses, documents, chains of custody. They need governments willing to cooperate. They need a world that cares. But the world in 1946 is exhausted. Revenge feels expensive. Reconstruction feels urgent. And Krause has disappeared into the exact space where bureaucracy protects bureaucrats. Every time Krause changes countries, he steps behind a new wall: sovereignty, friendly regimes, Cold War priorities, and the Vatican's own secrecy. Argentina doesn't extradite Germans it considers useful. Brazil absorbs European refugees without asking hard questions. Syria welcomes technical expertise regardless of origin. South Africa values capital and discretion. The ratlines aren't just escape routes. They're protective networks that span continents and ideologies. A quiet unit forms inside the British system in early 1947. Off-book, compartmented, built to do one thing: follow the administrative trail the ratlines cannot fully erase. The operation receives a file designation: Ashen. The control code is Larch 9, meaning only officers with specific clearance can access the full timeline. The logic is containment. If the hunt fails, the failure stays buried. If the hunt succeeds, the success stays deniable. 3 obstacles define the operation from the start. First, false identity layers backed by real institutions. Krause doesn't just forge a passport. He acquires church letters of recommendation, immigration stamps issued by legitimate officials, business registrations filed through proper channels. Every layer looks authentic because most of it is authentic. The forgery hides inside legitimacy. Second, jurisdiction traps. Argentina, Brazil, Syria, and South Africa won't cooperate the same way, if at all. Some countries refuse on principle. Others refuse for money. A few refuse because harboring certain Germans has become strategic leverage in a world splitting into blocks. Extradition treaties mean nothing when politics trump law. Third, time. Witnesses age. Memories blur. 16 years is long enough for the world to decide it wants to move on. Prosecutors close files. Journalists chase newer scandals. The survivors who remember Krause scatter across continents, and their testimony becomes harder to corroborate as decades pass. The urgency that drove Nuremberg fades into bureaucratic routine, but the trigger that moves planning to execution is not a confession. It's a match. In 1951, a set of camp dental records from liberated files aligns with a new man's medical history, enough to justify the most dangerous step: putting people on the ground to confirm identity. Dental work doesn't lie. Bridge patterns, root canals, extraction scars, these details survive name changes and plastic surgery. The alignment isn't perfect, but it's close enough to shift Ashen from theoretical tracking to operational planning. By 1952, the team assigned to Ashen understands they're not building a case for trial. They're building a file that can survive official denial. The question isn't whether Krause is guilty. The question is whether he can be found, confirmed, and dealt with before the world loses interest entirely. During the initial phase of Ashen, a case officer in London begins compiling what analysts call pattern evidence. This officer never travels, never meets sources, never touches operational fieldwork. His job is singular: connect fragments that mean nothing alone but everything together. He builds a reference system from liberated Nazi files, dental charts, and transport lists. The system receives an internal designation: orchard tables. It's not glamorous, it's not fast, but it's deadly accurate. Orchard tables works like this. Every camp kept medical records, often obsessively detailed. Every transport list included prisoner numbers tied to origin points. By cross-referencing dental charts with transport manifests and geographic patterns of movement, the analyst creates a searchable database where physical markers intersect with bureaucratic trails. When a new suspect emerges anywhere in the world, orchard tables can flag matches based on unchangeable biological details. A war criminal can change his name, his face, his nationality. He cannot retroactively change the dental work done in 1942. The case: officer spends months inside this data, treating memory like evidence, not emotion. Survivor testimonies flow in, 80+ accounts coded by reliability and detail level. One rule governs their use: no single witness proves it. Patterns do. 3 witnesses describe a functionary with a limp. 5 mention a man who wore wire-rimmed glasses. 7 recalls someone obsessed with train schedules. Individually, these details mean little. Together, they sketch a profile. Intercepted Vatican correspondence adds another layer. Through a friendly liaison channel, MI6 copies letters that don't name Krause, but repeat the same handwriting habits, the same phrasing, the same sponsoring priests. The correspondence reveals a network of clerical officials who view post-war placement as pastoral duty. They're not hiding criminals deliberately. They believe in forgiveness, in second chances, in the redemptive power of Christian mercy. But functionally, their belief system creates infrastructure that war criminals exploit ruthlessly. One letter, dated March 1949, discusses a displaced technician seeking assistance in South America. The handwriting matches samples from wartime memos found in abandoned Reich offices. The priest's name appears in 3 other letters spanning 2 years. The technician's destination shifts. First Argentina, then Brazil. But the protective language stays consistent. A man of skills, unjustly persecuted, deserving of our help. The Vatican never officially acknowledges these letters exist, but the copies sit inside orchard tables, indexed and waiting. The team structure remains lean and cold by necessity. One case officer in London who never travels and never meets sources. One field handler who rotates cover roles across continents, appearing as different people in different cities, never establishing a pattern. One analyst who lives inside orchard tables, cross-referencing every incoming lead against the database's growing architecture. Compartmentalization isn't paranoia. It's survival design. If one element gets compromised, the others continue operating. Cover identities are constructed to move through the post-war underworld without lighting flares. The field handler presents as a shipping insurance auditor with a real-looking ledger trail. Someone who has legitimate reason to ask questions in ports and trading hubs. Another cover involves a relief charity procurement agent who can inquire about displaced persons without sounding like law enforcement. A backstopped intermediary in Europe handles sensitive source meetings without linking them to London. Each identity has depth: bank accounts, correspondence trails, references who will vouch if checked. By late 1952, the operation has a map of the ratlines. Not a straight line to Krause, but a net that tightens every time he buys safety. Every time he registers a business, applies for residency, files a medical form, or makes a financial transaction, he creates a data point. The points accumulate. Ashen doesn't need dramatic breakthroughs. It needs patience and precision. The hunt moves like a tide. Slow, then suddenly unstoppable. First, Buenos Aires. The team follows church contacts and shipping manifests that repeat the same sponsor names. A lead points to Bariloche, a town in the Andes where European accents blend into the mountains and questions about origins are considered rude. The field handler spends 3 weeks there in late 1953, posing as a procurement agent sourcing leather goods. He makes no direct inquiries about Krause. He listens. In cafes and markets, patterns emerge. A German businessman who arrived in '47. A man with excellent Spanish, but a Prussian formality. Someone connected to church networks, but not overtly religious. The lead feels promising until it evaporates. Krause, or whoever he's become, moves again before Ashen can confirm. Then, Rio de Janeiro, where money laundering hides inside export companies. The financial trail looks solid. Wire transfers from European accounts, business registrations that cite industrial consultation, tax filings showing modest but legitimate income. The field handler follows the money through 3 intermediary firms before hitting a wall. The trail doesn't end. It multiplies. Krause has learned to split his financial identity across enough entities that no single thread reveals the pattern. Each time the trail gets warm, it snaps. Because Krause is not alone. Ratlines aren't just routes. They're communities, and communities protect their own. Former officers, sympathetic officials, businessmen who see value in discretion. They form a protective layer that reacts to pressure. When someone asks too many questions, word spreads. People disappear before investigators arrive. Documents vanish from archives. Meetings get canceled. The network doesn't need central coordination. It needs shared interest. The near derail happens in Damascus during summer 1956. A source offers a meeting with a man claiming to have arranged new papers for a high-value German. The approach comes through a trusted intermediary, someone who has provided solid intelligence before. It smells right, too right. The field handler agrees to the meeting but conducts pre-surveillance. During the approach, he notices a small tell. The source uses a specific name for an MI6 liaison that only insiders should know. The name isn't public. It exists in classified traffic. Either the source has penetrated MI6's communications, or someone else has and fed this information deliberately. The meeting is a provocation, possibly seeded by a rival service or a local security apparatus that wants leverage over British intelligence. Meeting would expose the field handler, confirm Ashen exists, and potentially create a diplomatic incident that would bury the entire hunt. The handler aborts. He leaves Damascus within 12 hours, traveling under a different passport, abandoning weeks of groundwork. Ashen pulls back, takes the loss, and recalibrates. The setback costs 6 months, confirms what planners already suspected. Other actors know someone is hunting, even if they don't know who or why. The window opens in early 1961 because of something boring: a medical form. A South African business registration file includes a routine insurance medical note for a Heinrich Krause, newly wealthy, newly respected, newly careful. The note lists dental work done in Europe before 1945, bridge patterns that match the Camp Index crosswalk inside orchard tables. The match isn't absolute, but the probability is high. The analyst flags it. The case officer greenlights a single question. Is the body in the photos the same body from the records? They don't need a face anymore. Surgery changed his face. They need an unchangeable marker, something no scalpel can erase. The final phase begins with reconnaissance, not action. Johannesburg, August 1961. A 2-person field team arrives separately under separate covers. The first presents as a minor commercial visitor with meetings logged into a believable schedule. 1,000 hours at a textile importer, 1,430 hours at a shipping consortium office. The meetings are real. The companies exist. The visitor shows up, conducts business, leaves paper trails. The second operative arrives a day earlier under completely different documentation, never touching the same hotels or routes. They avoid patterns. They avoid spy behavior. They behave like bored foreigners conducting unremarkable business in a city that absorbs thousands of such visitors annually. The infrastructure supporting them is minimal by design. No local safe houses, no pre-positioned equipment caches, no communications devices that could link them to London if discovered. Everything they need either arrives with them or gets acquired locally through methods that leave no traceable connection. One carries a camera common enough to be unremarkable. The other carries nothing that would raise suspicion during a customs inspection or police stop. Surveillance begins with the target's routine. Heinrich Krause, the name Krause now wears, lives in a Johannesburg suburb favored by wealthy European immigrants. His home is substantial but not ostentatious. Gated property, part-time domestic staff, security appropriate for his perceived status as a successful industrialist. He has cultivated respectability carefully. Memberships in business associations, charitable donations that get his name in local papers, a reputation for discretion and competence. The team maps his patterns over 2 weeks. Krause maintains a predictable schedule. Weekday mornings at his office downtown, lunches at the same 3 restaurants depending on the meeting type. Weekends often involve the country club, golf on Saturday, mornings, occasional social functions. He drives himself most days, but uses a driver for evening events. His security awareness is present, but not paranoid. He checks his surroundings. He varies routes occasionally. But he has lived in Johannesburg for 3 years without incident, and comfort breeds complacency. What planners need is confirmation before authorization. The dental records provide strong probability, but not certainty. False positives have derailed operations before. Ashen needs visual proof of a marker that cannot be forged or coincidental. The SS blood type tattoo. The practice started in 1937, when SS members received small tattoos on their inner left arms, indicating blood type for battlefield transfusions. By 1943, it had become standard enough that Allied intelligence used it as an identification marker during post-war processing. Krause received his tattoo in 1941. Camp records note it explicitly. Blutgruppe A in small Gothic lettering on the inner left arm, approximately 10 centimeters below the armpit. Plastic surgery can alter a face. It cannot erase ink embedded under skin without leaving obvious scarring. If the tattoo exists, the man is Krause. If it doesn't, Ashen withdraws and recalibrates. Gaining photographic evidence requires proximity without suspicion. The team identifies the country club as optimal terrain. Krause golfs regularly, and the club's social environment permits casual photography. Members take photos constantly. Tournament days, social mixers, charity events. One more camera blends invisibly. The approach comes through a photographer inside the target's social world, recruited without knowing the operation's true purpose. The photographer believes he's assisting a British insurance investigation into European asset claims. A story boring enough to be believable, vague enough to avoid scrutiny. He is asked to photograph guests at an upcoming club event, focusing on informal, candid shots that capture the relaxed atmosphere. The request comes with payment generous enough to ensure enthusiasm, but not so excessive as to trigger suspicion. September 9th, 1961. The country club hosts a charity mixer. Krause attends. The weather is warm. Jackets come off. Sleeves get rolled up. The photographer moves through the crowd, capturing moments designed to look spontaneous. Among hundreds of frames, several catch Krause mid-conversation beside a golf bag, reaching for a club, his sleeve pulled back. The mark is there. Faint after 20 years, partially faded but unmistakable to anyone who knows what they're looking for. The Gothic lettering, the placement, the confirmation. 1810 hours, September 12th. The photographer delivers the developed photos through a dead drop, a pre-arranged location where material changes hands without direct contact. A commercial courier service, paid in cash, moves the package from Johannesburg to Cape Town. From there, diplomatic pouch routing bypasses South African customs and postal systems. The photos reach London via a secure, compartmented channel that leaves no trace in standard embassy traffic. 1840 hours. The case officer receives the package. He examines the photos under magnification, cross-references against historical SS tattoo documentation, and compares the visible lettering style against known samples. The match holds. He writes one line in the Ashen file. ID holds. No celebration, no moral satisfaction. Just the cold confirmation that 16 years of work has produced a verified target. The decision comes from higher authority, but it comes quickly. The legal pathways remain blocked. South Africa has no interest in prosecuting a wealthy German businessman for crimes committed on another continent 2 decades prior. Extradition to Germany or Poland would require cooperation that doesn't exist and evidence that German courts might dispute. The international tribunals have moved on. Survivors lack resources to press claims. The ratlines still protect their own, and exposing Krause publicly would expose networks that multiple governments prefer to keep quiet. The calculus is brutal. If Krause cannot be brought to trial, and allowing him to live comfortably rewards the crime he designed, then the only remaining option is elimination. Not for deterrence, not for public justice. For the private ledger that says mass architects of murder don't retire safely. The authorization to proceed comes with explicit instructions. Complete deniability, no British fingerprints, nothing that creates diplomatic consequence. 1905 hours. The team performs the last checks that keep the operation deniable. No contact with local police, no linkable communications devices left behind. No witnesses who can describe British men later. Only a story that fits the neighborhood's context. Johannesburg, in 1961, experiences property crime regularly. Violent robberies targeting wealthy homes are common enough to be unremarkable, especially in suburbs where staff turnover creates security gaps. The estate's routine is observed from a distance, over 72 hours. Light patterns indicate when Kruger is home versus absent. Vehicle movements show when staff arrive and depart. A shift change happens at 2000 hours when the day cook leaves and evening security begins. A gap of approximately 12 minutes when the property is minimally monitored. The vulnerability isn't a broken lock or a disabled alarm. It's confidence. Krause lives as a respected businessman in a country where status buys silence, and where the police have little reason to question violence around wealth. During this final surveillance period, one operative experiences what operational psychologists later call legend drift. He has spent weeks inhabiting a commercial visitor identity so thoroughly that the false persona feels more real than his actual background. In a post-operation debrief months afterward, analysts note that he struggled to answer direct questions about his true name for several seconds, as though his brain needed to translate back from the cover identity. The drift is a known hazard in long-term undercover work. It doesn't compromise the mission, but it marks the operative in ways that training never fully captures. 20-40 hours. The estate's patterns confirm the window. Kruger is home. Staff has departed. The next shift begins at 0600 hours. The team approaches from separate vectors, using terrain features to avoid street-facing surveillance cameras. The entry point is a service gate on the property's eastern boundary, less visible from the main house, accessible through hedgerow that provides concealment from neighboring properties. The method prioritizes speed and certainty over elegance. Krause opens the door believing he's greeting someone expected, perhaps late-arriving staff or a neighbor with a minor request. The recognition of danger comes too late. The immediate incapacitation is achieved through physical trauma designed to prevent noise. Clinical medical reports from similar incidents describe loss of consciousness within seconds when specific cranial pressure points receive blunt force impact. Elapsed time from door opening to unconsciousness, approximately 8 seconds. The completion follows quickly because hesitation creates risk. The method used is manual asphyxiation. Pressure applied to the carotid arteries interrupts blood flow to the brain, causing death within 2 to 4 minutes. No gunfire. No wounds that would contradict a robbery scenario. No chemical traces that an autopsy might flag as suspicious. Just pressure, time, and the body's physiological shutdown when oxygen stops reaching critical systems. The scene staging happens methodically. Drawers opened and contents scattered. Safe accessed and emptied of cash and small valuables. Items taken that a robbery team would logically steal. Jewelry, portable electronics, currency. Items left behind that would have no resale value. Documents, photographs, personal effects. The staging doesn't need to fool expert investigators. It needs to give local police a plausible narrative that closes the case without requiring deeper investigation. 26 hours. The team exits on separate paths. One leaves Johannesburg by morning train to Cape Town, traveling under commercial documentation. The other departs by car to Durban, returning a rental vehicle at the airport before boarding an outbound flight under a different passport. They carry nothing linking them to the scene. No souvenirs, no trophies, no physical evidence beyond what their presence inevitably left behind. Fiber traces, perhaps a partial footprint, but nothing that points specifically to British intelligence. The estate remains undiscovered until 07:15 hours the next morning when arriving staff find the door ajar and the interior disturbed. Police respond within 40 minutes. The scene appears consistent with property crime. Forced entry narrative, signs of search, valuables missing, victim deceased from apparent struggle. The official investigation focuses on known criminal elements operating in the area. Several suspects get questioned. None lead anywhere. The next day, newspapers describe a tragedy. German businessman killed in robbery, reads one headline. Another notes the victim's contributions to local business associations and charitable causes. The name Krause never appears. And in a secure room far away, a file is stamped and closed, not because justice is complete, but because the hunt is over. The death is discovered within hours, and the official story hardens quickly. South African police treat it as a property crime that escalated. The investigation follows predictable patterns. Interview staff. Check for known burglary crews. Review financial records for personal disputes. Every lead ends in procedural dead ends. No witnesses saw the perpetrators. No physical evidence produces usable forensics. The case file remains open officially, but inactive practically. Within intelligence circles, the reaction is more complex. A small number of officers inside MI6 know Ashen succeeded. They record it internally as the resolution of a long-standing liability. One fewer living architect of genocide who successfully evaded justice through ratlines and post-war protection networks. There is no victory celebration, no internal commendations. Just a notation in the file and the quiet satisfaction that Krause did not die peacefully in old age, surrounded by wealth he built on stolen time. Public reactions remain non-existent because the public never learns who Heinrich Krause actually was. Survivors who testified about Krause years earlier never received confirmation that he was found or dealt with. The diplomatic protection that shielded him in life continues in death. Governments that quietly harbored him have no interest in admitting they did so. The operation's success depends on anonymity. justice without witnesses, accountability without acknowledgement. Strategic assessment inside MI6 reveals competing perspectives. Some officers believe a courtroom was always the point, that eliminating Krause without trial sets a dangerous precedent where intelligence services become judge and executioner. They argue that even delayed justice should flow through legal systems, not shadow operations. Others counter that the courtroom was impossible because post-war networks would have protected him or traded him like a bargaining chip in Cold War politics. They argue that doing nothing rewards the crime as much as protecting the criminal does. The cost calculation extends beyond Krause's death. Ashen's methods require crossing lines that can't be uncrossed. Once an intelligence service decides it can eliminate targets extra-legally. When law proves inadequate, it creates capability that outlives any single operation. Future officers inherit both the precedent and the tools. Whether that inheritance serves justice or enables abuse depends entirely on who holds power and what they consider intolerable. Operationally, Ashen teaches lessons that reshape intelligence tradecraft for decades. The effectiveness of long-horizon identity work becomes doctrine. Agencies invest heavily in biometric databases, dental records, unchangeable physical markers. The recognition that bodies can be renamed but not fully rewritten drives development of identification systems that don't rely on documents or testimony. Pattern analysis becomes central to counterintelligence, watching for behaviors and connections that reveal identity even when names change. The unintended consequences also matter. Closing Ashen teaches a dangerous lesson inside institutions. When politics blocks justice, shadow justice becomes tempting. That lesson outlives Krause. It influences operations in subsequent decades when other targets, terrorists, proliferators, hostile intelligence officers, exist beyond legal reach. The moral justification used for Krause, that his crimes warranted extrajudicial action, becomes a template that gets applied to increasingly ambiguous cases. The human cost extends beyond the operation's immediate actors. The operative who experienced legend drift during surveillance never fully recovers his previous operational effectiveness. Post-mission psychological assessments note persistent disassociation symptoms. He retires from field work within 3 years, citing personal reasons. The analyst who spent years inside orchard tables develops what contemporaries describe as archive sickness, an inability to separate from the work, a compulsion to keep searching even after the case closes. He continues working tangential Nazi hunting operations until retirement, always looking for the next thread, for survivors who never learned Krause's fate. The absence of closure creates its own damage. They testified in the late 1940s, believing their accounts would fuel prosecution. They waited for news. They watched as trials concluded without Krause's name appearing. They aged into a world that increasingly preferred to forget. Whether Ashen's success would have given them peace is unknowable. They never got the chance to find out. The moral question Ashen poses refuses easy answers. One perspective argues that Krause designed mass murder and escaped legal accountability through networks that valued protection over justice. Stopping him was justice delayed, not denied. The fact that courts couldn't reach him doesn't erase his guilt. The operation gave survivors outcomes the legal system failed to deliver. The opposing perspective argues that once an intelligence service becomes judge and executioner, it creates a weapon that can be aimed at anyone when politics change. The rationale that justifies Krause's elimination, extraordinary crimes warrant extraordinary responses, has no natural limiting principle. If unaccountable killings are acceptable when targets are sufficiently evil, Who decides sufficient? Who prevents the expansion of that power to less clear cases? Democratic societies create legal systems specifically to prevent this consolidation of authority. Both perspectives contain truth. Krause objectively engineered the deaths of thousands through bureaucratic systems designed to make murder look administrative. The world's failure to prosecute him represents systemic failure, not his innocence. Simultaneously, Ashen represents power exercised without accountability, creating precedent that erodes the principle that even the worst criminals deserve trial. The answer reveals more about your worldview than about Krause. If you prioritize outcomes, the genocidal architects should face consequences regardless of legal barriers, then Ashen looks like necessary action in an imperfect world. If you prioritize process, that legitimate justice requires transparent legal systems even when they move slowly or fail. Then Ashen looks like a dangerous shortcut that undermines the principles it claims to defend. What's your take on this operation? If you had proof a war criminal was living safely under a new name, protected by networks that value discretion over justice, and the legal system would never touch him, would you accept an assassination to stop him? Or does that make you part of the same cycle, using extrajudicial killing to answer extrajudicial killing, becoming the thing you claim to oppose? Drop your perspective in the comments. If this story made you reconsider what justice looks like when legal systems fail, hit that like button and share this with someone who appreciates the complexity of moral decisions that have no clean answers.